Demo of our Lumberyard engine and the editor for it. My new shiny razor blade is stuck in customs. So forget that. That's not happening. I have this instead. AWS What's New update. Okay, so I'll apologize. Next time I will bring the engine. I will show you some demos of the engine. I'm going to return and talk a little bit about new features in Lumberyard later on during this session. So I hope that's not too much of a disappointment. Does anybody know the significance of this picture? 10 years. So 14th of March, we hit the 10th anniversary of operations for Amazon S3, which is our not-so-simple object storage service. It was a simple storage service when we launched it. And I'm sure a lot of you, as AWS, I won't say fans, passionate AWS users, have already seen these posts, but if you haven't taken a look at them, check these out. These are some perspectives that have been written by some of the guys that were there at or near the beginning of Amazon Web Services, and they're well worth taking a look at for a quick recap of what's happened over the course of the last 10 years. This is from a guy called James Hamilton, who some of you will know as a person who talks often in a lot of detail about AWS infrastructure at AWS events and other events. He's a very actually illustrious computer scientist who worked on DB2 and then later on Microsoft SQL Server as the architect for that. Now he is optimization and an architecture specialist at AWS, so you can take a look at that. And then additionally this from Werner, who a lot of you will know from AWS Summits and other events, is the CTO at Amazon.com. So if you've not seen these two posts, I would say check them out. They're pretty cool. They give a bit of a potted history of what's happened over the last 10 years and just cast some perspective really on how we've got here and things that have been done by us and by customers during that period. They're pretty interesting. We've also got this kind of cool infographic, which I'm not going to dwell on here because I haven't got a lot of time, other than this one, which I particularly like. So every month, customers run enough AWS Marketplace products to go to Mars and back 11,729 times in elapsed time. It's pretty cool. So, a few other things. First of all, if you've not already got these dates in your diary, I'd love you to hold them. We're going to come back this year to the Excel Centre in Docklands for the, I think it's the third or fourth AWS Summit here in the UK. Bigger and better than last year. This year we're going to go for 2 days of content. That's really to help us do two things. Run a very large track for enterprise users of our services on day one, but also we're going to explore some approaches for helping people get access to the more popular technical sessions. We know that last year it was quite tough to get into things like ECS, Lambda were heavily oversubscribed, and I think there was a little bit of camping going on in the session rooms as well by people that were refusing to leave them because they knew it was coming next. So this year we're going to try and improve the experience with a larger space in the venue, and if we have very popular sessions through pre-reg, we'll pull some of those sessions forward and run them on day one. So just go here. You can pre-register now for this summit event, and as soon as we open registrations, of course, you'll get an email on that. John's lunch queues, yeah. There will be lunch queues, I guarantee it. So, some new technical features that we've recently announced. The first thing is the IOT service, which was covered quite extensively at our reInvent recap back in November by Carlos, my ex-boss, who's now left to go to DNA Nexus. We've added some additional data endpoints, destinations for IoT events, and you can now integrate AWS with Elasticsearch clusters, so send your JSON from your IoT devices directly into Elasticsearch, and obviously visualize that using Kibana and other Elasticsearch compatible visualization tools. And you can also directly trigger CloudWatch alarms and capture CloudWatch metrics directly from our IoT service. So you could quite simply, for example, build a microcontroller with 2 buttons on it and use these buttons to scale up and down an auto-scaling group just by pressing the buttons. Each button could emit a different event, and you could capture those events and route them directly to a CloudWatch alarm, which in turn triggers an auto-scaling action. So it's intended for systems automation, activities like that, but also for helping you observe metrics on event volumes that might be flowing through IoT services. So that's pretty new. We also shipped a new version of EMR, so this is in keeping with our theme of trying to increase the cadence at which we release these. So it used to be that EMR would get updated infrequently, let's say. Now we're shipping updates every 6 weeks. And notice with this latest update, we have this new open source project, which is a visualizer for Spark-based analytics running on EMR, which ships natively with EMR 4.4. So if you want to experiment with this, it's actually gaining quite a lot of traction in the data science community. It's a little bit like Hue, the Hadoop user experience, but specifically for Spark-based visualization. You might want to take a look at that as well. That's a pretty cool feature. We got some enhancements to S3, so introducing some enhancements to make it easier to manage really some quite unusual needs in terms of the number of users going to face them, but very important, particularly in things like video transcoding. We can now automatically clean up incomplete multi-part uploads, and we can now automatically clean down deletion markers for lifecycle policies as well. So they're quality of life improvements really to reduce the amount of code that developers that are managing very large data sets on S3 that are very transient in nature need to write for kind of management of the platform. Similar sort of theme, some quality of life improvements for developers that are using code deploy and code commit. So on code deploy, we've got SNS events now for particular deployment actions, so you can be notified on a successful deploy or a failing deploy. That was quite an important and popular feature request. And then secondly, on code commit, you can actually emit events from code commit operations. You can also trigger Lambda functions from code commit operations. So you can use Lambda to build a check-in automation process that might do code validation, maybe measure developer productivity, something that's very popular, I guess, in this room, and perform other actions that you might want to script or develop using, obviously, Python, JavaScript, or Java in Lambda functions. We shipped a brand new SDK for encryption. This is making it more simple for developers to work with keys that are stored in KMS and to use these as trust routes for things like application secret encryption that you might need to do during a deployment process. And actually a really excellent blog post that goes with this on the AWS security blog, which talks about common use cases for KMS and how customers use the service in the wild, because obviously we use it, or enable you to use it rather, for data encryption at rest, but you can use the root keys that are available to you within KMS for a lot of other encryption operations. And we really, as well as shipping this SDK, we've provided quite a lot of guidance about best practice for use of KMS for particular encryption scenarios that you might want to support. So that's well worth a read. It's quite a few thousand words, but it's pretty good. DMS, database migration, this was GA'd. And we also announced that the C++ SDK for AWS was reaching what we call developer preview, which is the last stage before it goes into beta or GA, depending on its state of maturity. And we added a lot of support. If you grab the slides, which I'll obviously put on SlideShare, click this link, you can find an hour-long session about C++ development using our SDK, if there are any C++ programmers here, which kind of neatly segues me into the next part of my talk, which is about Lumberyard. Just very briefly, because obviously I don't have my laptop. A bit annoying. Okay. So this is a free-to-use game engine that we announced. So it's a fork of an engine called Crytek, which is pretty well used, actually. We have a version of that engine that we've extended and modified. When I say we, I mean AWS in conjunction with Amazon Game Studios, which is another part of Amazon.com. We use that engine quite extensively for IP that we're developing, games that we're developing inside Amazon Game Studios. What we've done is extended it to provide integration with AWS backend services. So you can essentially use the C++ SDK that we have pre-integrated with the engine, and you can then do things like compute offload to Lambda functions from directly within the engine. You can use DynamoDB for both a general purpose data store, but also some things that are used very frequently within game development, things like atomic counters. That's a feature that's available in DynamoDB that you can trigger from within the SDK. You can do queuing offload with SQS, and you can use Amazon Cognito for identity management, so to issue short-term credentials to the engine as it's running to enable it to work directly with AWS service endpoints. And of course, there's also S3 integration for things like static assets, audio and video that you might want to pull down into your engine that you've built. So that's the first thing that we did. We also shipped a few enhancements here. Now, these are pretty gaming specific, and I'm sure there are a lot of gamers in the room, right? So who here plays video games? Good. Okay, so they're going to like these next things. So I didn't actually know about some of this technology until this release. The first thing we've got is something called substance integration, and this is for procedurally generating materials and textures. So if you look at a modern video game, like maybe a building that's made out of rusted steel, for example, in the old days you would have graphics artists basically drawing rusted steel or whatever your texture is, and you'd see that every instance of an asset within the game looked the same. So every tree would look the same, every spaceship would look the same. What you've got with this substance, which is an additional third-party software product, is procedural generation of surface textures. So they have mathematical models that will generate you 50 square meters of unique rusted metal, or beach full of sand, okay? And when you walk along the beach, it won't look the same. No matter how far you get along the beach, the same texture will not be repeated because they've been generated procedurally by the engine in real time as you need to stream the assets into the game world. So we have that integration. Basically, you can pull that into the editor now, the assets that you create with Substance, and you can use that. And then with FBX, this is a commonly used intermediary format for meshes and materials. So the primitives that you use to build 3D models for actually gaming and also VR. And this FBX importer allows you to get those assets directly into the Lumberyard editor and work with them in your games. It also supports dynamic linking of assets. So if you've got a tool chain that develops and delivers your FBXs to you pre-rendered, pre-constructed, and you modify something in the tool chain, the editor will update automatically with the new characteristics of that asset that you've just built. It's like a CI tool for games developers. That's a pretty cool feature as well. There's way more on this, by the way, if you visit the URL at the top of this slide. And then secondly, this is the other feature or set of features that we added when we announced Lumberyard. This is Gamelift. This is for fleet management for large fleets of session-based game servers. So if you're thinking about first-person shooters, League of Legends, other games like this, your game sessions last, 45 minutes to an hour, probably on average. And this means there's a really high turnover of instances of session servers, essentially, as gamers come on and play their games. And this is highly variable in terms of where your infrastructure is located in the world. So your peak window in Korea is obviously going to be time shifted against the peak window in the UK or in Europe. And it's a pretty tough process, actually, for games operators, rather than developers, games operators, to manage scaling, infrastructure deployment, and the life cycle of the infrastructure that's required to support this. I mean, do you know what the kind of peak load is if you ship a title like Star Wars Battlefront on the PC, the Xbox One, and the PS4 over that first 24 hours? I know the numbers. They're absolutely not enormous. And then you have this sort of gradual scale off. Then you might have a piece of DLC or another piece of content, and usage will rocket back up again, and again it will gradually fade off. So Gamelift's really intended to make it simpler to do that. We provide a set of deployment tooling to help you get your engine builds into production and to manage the life cycle of new engine builds as you ship them and then put them out into production. We also, this is important, we provide specific metrics that are related to the metrics that are useful for game operators. So you're not going to scale on things like how much CPU is utilized across my fleet of servers. You're going to scale on things like how deep is my queue, how many people are waiting to be match-made, I guess, in each different region, or what is the rate at which new players are joining my matchmaking service. And you can scale the fleet of game servers on the basis of these important metrics. Okay, so it's really intended to simplify back-end operations. All make sense? Who knows what this is? Okay, I have an announcement. I don't normally get graced with announcements for these events, but I have an announcement tonight. You notice this is slightly different from this one. Okay, and that's because we're coming back in a new location. We're going to be back in London between the 18th and 28th of April. And you have about an hour of exclusive access to book sessions, because we haven't yet sent out our first promotional email encouraging people to book sessions at the Loft. So you guys in this room, you're quite lucky. You can go to AWS Loft London right now on your phone or your laptop, and you will have exclusive access to book whatever sessions you want to book at the Loft over the 9-day period that we're going to be open again in April without any other customers stealing your valuable places. And we've got a lot of good stuff this year. We've got, of course, sessions about AWS core services. We're going to have a half-day workshop on API services using our API gateway that Michael talked about in conjunction with one of our partners, Apogee. We're going to have a half-day microservices workshop focusing on building a chat application that will help you survive communications disruption during a zombie apocalypse. I didn't think of it, but I think it's good. And we're going to have focus sessions on big data and other things as well. So if you do have an interest in getting access to AWS subject matter experts and learning more about how you can use our technology, and of course accessing our solutions architects, drinking our coffee, using our Wi-Fi and using our co-working space, just go here and register exclusively for AWS user group members here in London. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Ian, for that update. Regarding AWS Loft, it's well worth signing up for it now. When they were here, was it earlier on in the year?
Yeah, we were here in October to the beginning of December last year.
Yeah.
It was a lot longer in duration. We're going to be a little bit more focused and maybe come back a couple more times later in the year as well if we see high activity.
Yeah, I was at their event, their Loft event in October, and I signed up for the for the events, and they were all full on the first day. So if you've got exclusive access, please take advantage of it. Anyway, listen, thanks a lot. We're going to have a break now till 8:30. If you can grab some food downstairs, yeah.